Welcome back to the main stage. In more ways than we can count and faster than we could have ever imagined, artificial intelligence is transforming the business, social, and civic landscape in the U.S. and around the globe. AI can and will be a major factor in the health and operations of nonprofits and the well-being of the communities we serve. And nonprofits will be faced with new challenges as they seek to understand the potential risks of these rapidly evolving technologies. Our panel today will both build our understanding of AI and explore its various implications for the nonprofit sector. Join us for a conversation that might terrify us just a bit, but should, for sure, inspire us with a wider understanding of all the ways in which AI can be harnessed to better advance our missions. And please welcome to the main stage our panelists, led by moderator Art Taylor, President and CEO of BBB Wise Giving Alliance.
Whoa. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Art Taylor, and I want to just start real quick, if I could, just by a show of hands. And I wrote this down. How many of you see AI as something that's really terrifying? Raise your hand. We got some hands over here. Some hands over there, too. Okay. How many of you see AI as something that's really transformative? A lot more hands. Some hopeful people in the group.
How many people raise their hands twice? Okay, there you go.
Yeah, that's the third one. So the third one is how many of you see it as both?
There's the disaggregated.
There you go.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a little conversation today about this. And let me just briefly introduce my panelists and let them introduce themselves a little bit, starting with Toshi Hu. Toshi is the Emerging Media Lab Director at the Institute for the Future. So Toshi, tell us a little about you and what you do.
Sure, yeah. So Institute for the Future, or IFTF, we are a futures research and design organization. We were founded back in 1968. At the start of the internet by some of the computer and social scientists working on what was at the time called the ARPANET. It was before it was even called the internet. And they started thinking like, hey, what if this technology kind of spread throughout the world and everybody could have real-time access to information and talk to everybody in real time? Like, maybe that'll change the whole world. And so for the last 50 years, basically, IFTF's been helping organizations in the public and private sector help anticipate and adapt and advocate for the kind of futures that they want as we enter into new periods with disruptive technologies. And we have a number of different labs at IFTF, looking at everything from the future of food, future of governance, future of work. We have an equitable futures lab. And I'm the director of the Emerging Media Lab, which is looking at the future of human communication, collaboration, and connection, all through this lens of emerging media technology, as well as new emerging media mythologies, not just the technologies, but what are the new stories that are possible that we couldn't tell before? What are the new types of conversations and collaborations we could have that we couldn't have before? And my work for the last year has been really focused on generative AI. So I'm super excited to be here and talk with the panel on this today.
So Amy Sample Ward is the CEO of N10. And she's been working a lot on equitable use of technology. But tell us more about your work, Amy.
Sure. Yes, I'm Amy Sample Ward. I use they, them. And I'm the CEO of N10, which is a nonprofit organization that was formed back in 2000, not exactly 68. But it was formed by hundreds of folks who saw that technology really could support our missions and support nonprofit work, but needed to be resourced and trained and really understood. So our work is to create a world where we really have equitable and strategic technology that works for all of us. We train organizations, staff all around the world, provide resources, community connection points so that we can share and learn together because as Jasmine is about to say, technology is changing every day. within the last hour. So it's really important that we are not alone in trying to figure out technology, whether that's building it, adopting it, using it, et cetera, and that we are sharing and learning in that work together so that we really could have an equitable world and that we really could have technology in that equitable world with us.
Great. And Jasmine Thomas is the Senior Director of Innovation and Society at Microsoft. And she's working on tech as a fundamental right. Can you imagine doing that inside of a company, which happens to be probably the largest purveyor of AI? So tell us about what you're doing, Jasmine.
It's a pleasure to be here and on this panel with such smart people. I still wonder, I'm like, are you sure? But I'm so excited to be here. And I think first, I come to this work after 15 years of working at the intersection of race, community development, and asset building, and literally putting all of that work at the center. And if you look at what's happened in technology, I approached it from initially the financial inclusion gap to now what we know as the digital divide. And that digital divide comes from a system that was built that did not include communities of color as part of that process. And it did not include as part of, in a respective way, where people live. And so the work that I did at Microsoft initially was building out, which is called the digital equity map. If you Google it, yes, I said it. You can Bing it. But, you know, my mama told me don't tell lies.
If you do an internet search.
Exactly. If you do an internet search. But feel free to use Bing AI. But you know, if you look it up, the digital equity map starts to map where people have access. And if, as practitioners, I'm a social worker by trade first. Despite everything you see, I start with where the client is, where people are. And I have to look at where that technology and infrastructure exists. So before we talk about AI, we've got to talk about, do you know where technology exists in the communities where you work? If you don't, that's problem number one. You can't talk about any of this stuff unless you know where that happens. Number two, technology is changing quickly. It's changing fast. I have the pleasure of looking at technology as a fundamental right, meaning at Microsoft where the mission is simply empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. For us, technology as a fundamental right is a division of people who are literally looking at the ways in which technology and data can advance accessible, affordable access to meaningful technology and connectivity around the world, including access to the internet. Huge commitment in Africa right now, 250 million people by December 31st, 2025, and the team is gonna kill it. Focusing on constitutional little d democracies and inclusive fair societies, I work in that pillar, and responsible business practices and human rights. So what are the ways in which technology can address that? So we're all leaning in heavily across the entire institution, but specifically our team is, how can AI protect or advance our humanity? And how can we be responsible with it? If anybody's read Brad Smith, our president's book, Tools and Weapons, I would highly recommend it. And if you drive long commutes, like I'm sure many of you have, I lived in New York, I still do. If I drive into the city, I know it's not environmentally friendly, but I have a Prius. So I'm not spending a lot of gas. Audible, you hear his voice and you hear how technology can be a game changer for communities, or it can be the scariest thing on the planet. So for us, it really is about how can we use our corporate dollars, our investments, to illuminate that work. And I have the pleasure every day of looking at how are we building the talent pipeline necessary to be inclusive in AI, in data science, in quantum computing. Who's behind the learning models, and how are we building that in a way that makes communities, makes the technology safer, more responsible, and more to our advantage as human beings on this planet.
Fantastic. That's a big job.
I know. I don't sleep. I don't sleep. None of us do, actually.
Yeah. So Akila we had a chance to meet earlier this year. She said, I want to do a session at Upswell on AI. And I think we were all at that point just beginning to come to grips with this. But if you go back, I don't know, beginning of the year, from what I'm told, they released this thing called ChatGPT, and within like 2 months, like 100 million people
Yeah.
signed on. Is that right?
That's correct.
And today, I think there's something like 180 million people that have used this.
Yes.
So I didn't even ask the question whether you're all using it, because I'm sure in some way you probably are. But we're going to get into today, what is it? What's behind it? What's going on here? And I want to just turn to Amy to help us level set what we're talking about when we say AI.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of things. Okay. Quick overview of what we're talking about. AI, artificial intelligence, is not new. Is a marketing term. So don't feel like there has to be some, secret club for AI. It's just, a solution. CRM, all these things are used to categorize and market technology. But what we're going to talk about today are probably two kind of areas of technology development under this umbrella term of artificial intelligence. I think it's important to start from acknowledging that these technologies are not new. We have been developing, making these technologies that we're calling AI for decades. The thing that is new is that Microsoft, other entities, other technology service providers now have access to a size of data, thanks to all of us using the internet, that we can train and enable these tools to work at a scale or level of functionality that they couldn't before when data or content was more limited. So while we may be talking about AI in new or different ways now, don't feel like this just happened, overnight. It's been around for a long time. So two pieces that we're probably talking about in this conversation and words that have already been used. So one area of AI is predictive AI. So anybody who has clicked watch when Netflix has suggested a show for you to watch, you were using predictive AI. These are tools designed to analyze a data set and then look for those same trends or anticipate actions based on what it learned in that first data set. Of course, the opportunities with this for organizations in this room are often internal opportunities to analyze your program or service delivery participant data and then anticipate somebody that might need another service that you provide. The other side is generative AI, sometimes called Gen AI, to make it sound even more intense. So these are tools that maybe folks in the room have made your 70s yearbook photo, those types of tools. So they are learning from content versus predictive AI, which was mostly just learning from data. So generative AI tools are learning off of content and then able to create new content for you based on your prompts. Opportunities here, of course, I think are often looked at for efficiency and time saving for staff, getting a draft that you can edit versus having to do the draft and the edit yourself. What I think is really important in all of this is there are opportunities. There are, of course, massive risks. And in between opportunity and risk are the considerations that we're probably going to talk about today that you will talk about inevitably every day going forward, right? How do you want to navigate those opportunities and risks? There is no one answer for the sector, no one answer even just for the groups in this room. Folks will and can and should have your own policies, your own guidelines, your own decisions on which tools and when and how. So I don't want to start with anything that we might say that sounds real tweetable and clear is still needing to be landed in your organization with the nuance of your values, of your mission, of your community, of your staff needs. And while NTEN might have one answer and Institute for the Future might have another, you will inevitably have your own. Mm-hmm. And I want that to be empowering and not overwhelming. Not oh my gosh, how would we do that? But really to say that there's such a diversity in the technologies that already exist, and hopefully in an equitable world, we still have a diversity of tools. Are they the ones we have today? Probably not. The world is not doing great. So if we are to make it to an equitable world, we'll need to continue to change these tools as we grow and learn and develop things for the future together. And lastly, I'll say, as the final piece of level set, everyone in this room has already used AI. You are probably enabling it inside your organization without knowing it. And that is, I think, one of the takeaways we'll probably loop back to over and over in this conversation is that we need intentionality. We need purpose. We need knowledge about these technologies. Every time, your email, whether you're using Outlook or Gmail, when it suggests a reply, you are using AI right there. If you log into your database and it says, oh, here's 3 participants that might need a message, you have already enabled AI in your database. Do your policies reflect that you have done that? Did you know that you had done that? Maybe you would like to turn it off until you know what you're doing, So there's a lot here in between opportunity and risk that's really about your community and your needs.
Can I just add one thing?
Go right ahead.
It's not meant to be an easy button, at least from Microsoft's perspective. No one expects that you're, like that 80s show. I'm dating myself. But, you're not going to just put your hands together and then blink and it's done. It requires your engagement. So, at Microsoft, we call it Copilot for a reason. It requires editing, looking at it. Does it make sense? Is it the nuance correct? Is it accurate? So I don't think you should envision a moment where it's just going to do it all for you. It does require your participation and engagement. So that is a part of, I guess, nuance that we should, and a clarity that we should offer is that it's just not going to be something that takes over for you. You actively need to engage with it.
Yeah, Toshi, I think you had a phrase for that level of engagement. I'm trying to remember what it was, but I'll leave it to you to kind of talk about that.
Well, just to build off what Jasmine's saying, I mean, I love researching, particularly generative AI, because it's just a very weird technology. Like, in many ways, like we've said, we've had AI in our lives, but generative AI is very different in many ways. One of the ways is, first of all, no one knows how it works. We kind of know how it works, but we don't fully understand why it does what it does, even the people making it, and we don't know what it's going to do, and it's what's called non-deterministic, which means you never quite know if it's going to do the same thing twice. That's not a typical software package that an organization would install, like, at an enterprise level, right? Like, especially at a bank where, you want the numbers to be the same every time, right? So that's one weird thing. Another weird thing is that, this first crop of generative AI, the ChatGPT, these are built on what's called large language models, where they've taken, as Amy mentioned, literally like 1 trillion words on the internet, crunch that with this kind of new technology called transformers, try to make a model of like, what's the relationship of words to each other? And in some ways we've discovered more than we've invented this technology, because researchers put this together and they weren't even sure exactly if it was going to work. They did it and they're like, whoa, this kind of talks like a human. And it was very surprising. I think a lot of people had that experience last November, almost 1 year, almost exactly to the day when ChatGPT came online, November 20-something.
Around Thanksgiving, yeah.
Yeah, right after Thanksgiving, where they were like, whoa, this is different than any chatbot I've ever talked to. This isn't Siri, this isn't Alexa. Like, I can have a whole conversation, a coherent conversation. Now, one of the things that's misleading about that is it's easy, humans tend to, we have a lot of socialization around language and things like that. So it's easy to think of it as an entity, a being, right? But I really think it is important, as Jasmine said, to really understand that these are tools. Mm-hmm. And we need to figure out how to decide how to use that. And I think, there's a kind of like assumptions arc I've seen a lot of people have. You may be somewhere on this arc yourself where, a lot of folks kind of start with the assumption like, okay, they've been talking about AI for years. It's not, never happened. And then you have your kind of ChatGPT moment where you see something that just blows your mind. You're like, whoa. And then the next thought is, oh my gosh, this thing can do everything. Like, am I gonna have a job next year? Right? Everybody goes through that, I think. Then we get into, like, as you start to learn and build more nuanced understanding, you learn some other interesting things about these generative AI technologies, is which they sometimes make things up, right? It makes up it calls hallucinations. It gives, and it makes up things that sound exactly like an answer. In fact, that's what these systems are designed to do, is to predict the next word in a sentence that sounds like an answer. So it's really hard to tell. So now we've got these systems that we're rapidly deploying across all of our information, communication, and decision-making systems all across the world, which make things up. So now we start to say, okay, well, maybe we need a human in the loop. Maybe we can't automate everything. Then you realize, oh, you actually need more than a human in the loop. You need an expert in the loop, because only an expert can monitor and know when it's making things up. And then we start realizing, and this is where I think we're going to more practically end up as we kind of go on this arc, is an AI in the loop, in our human systems, right? The AIs are not coming here to take over everything we do. This is a tool for us. So, yeah.
So staying on that theme for just a minute, Jasmine, I know you spend a lot of time trying to think through how we not make this the movies. It's not going to turn out, so that we don't turn out to be these things that technology rules, right? Talk about some of the real concerns that exist with this technology and some of the things we might think about doing to mitigate them.
I think the first I raised in my intro, and that is we have a real digital divide that still exists today. Toshi talked about, it's building, and Amy did as well. It's building based on what's already out there. Well, who has access to what's already out there? You have to think about who's missing from the internet, feeding data, information, experience, images, photos. So when you think about who's missing from those stories, then you know that it's building based on who's participating and who's not. So a lot of the work that there's a whole team at Microsoft is working on, both on our Microsoft philanthropy side, but also on a team that's called Airband that I came on, focused on closing the digital divide, bringing people online, having them focus on broadband adoption, but also digital skilling as a way to make sure that people know how to interact with the internet. And that's amazing, right? It's game changing. People know how to use their phones, but when it comes to actual devices, some people didn't know what a mouse was. And I experienced that myself in doing that work, particularly in rural America in certain communities, even in the United States in urban cities. So the digital divide is one. So creating a digital divide in AI is one. I think the other is, discrimination, where, to your point, we were just talking about that. You have a situation where someone could be using it for a reason that, is not responsible. It's not appropriate, and no one knows that that's happening. Amy also talked about what's in your policies. We put out a responsible AI blueprint, educated people on it, put out a risk framework, have been taking it to the hill, taking it to anybody who listens, to make sure that we can be clear about the ways in which we should be interacting in this space. I think the other is, again, who's behind building the language models. And so my work is very much about working with universities to make sure that we have enough talent going into the field, and to be frank, not going into companies to do this work, but going into public interest tech, going into nonprofits to do this work. You can't have everybody in one sector. So when you think about what's the long-range opportunity, it is making sure that we have a balanced talent pipeline across all sectors, who know how this works, who are innovating in this space, but who also are using this to transform fields. I'm a social worker. I had to leave because I got tired of the paperwork. I want to be honest. I got tired of the paperwork. I couldn't spend time really helping people. I had clients who needed my time, and the time it took to process the documents and put in all the psychosocials and submit all that paperwork, it was ridiculous. I want more productivity in spending time with the people that need my services. So anything that moves me in that direction is amazing. So I do spend my days now working with the physicians at major medical hospitals. I can't mention names just yet because the money hasn't changed hands. Rule number one in philanthropy, don't say it until they have the money in their bank account.
Amen.
The second thing is transforming industries and fields. So my next thing is social work. How do we transform and shake up how we're trained, how we serve people? And also, what are those other spaces where, you know, we're spending too much time in areas that doesn't allow us to maximize impact in people's lives?
Amy, why don't you jump in here?
Yeah.
Because I really think that you've spent a lot of time helping organizations in our sector better utilize tech, and I'm sure you have some thoughts about.
Yeah, I want to like highlight or underline or plus one some of Jasmine's brilliance here. I think two things, and Toshi and I were actually talking about this over coffee earlier, that we see at N10 so many folks who are doing the work, who are advancing their missions, who are in community, trying to make the world better. And they are, because of that, because their closeness to the community and their mission, most qualified to have these conversations about technology and are most likely to self-disqualify themselves.
Yes.
To say, who am I?
Yes.
Right? Who am I? I am not a technologist. I'm
Yeah.
no expert. You are the best experts to be saying, this is not working for us. This is not what we need. This is not serving us. This does not benefit us. And so I want to name that and say everybody here is more than qualified. Please, please, we need all of us in those conversations saying, we are the people. Technology should bend to us. I am not bending to technology. And then the other side of that is part of reminding ourselves that we are qualified for this is saying this is actually not a different technology conversation than all the other ones hopefully you have had or will continue to have. Technology is not a neutral tool. And that's not just digital technology. There are people that die every year on construction sites because they're left-handed and they're using a right-handed tool, right? It was optimized for right-handed people. So anything us humans create, we are wonderful at creating bias, right? Of creating things that work just for those of us who were building it, right? So it's not unique to digital technologies, but it's also not unique to AI. We need to be able to say, hey, the people that we work with cannot use this. They were not represented in the training data. They are not supported in having access to even use this from the devices they can have, whatever that might be. But you are the best people to be leading those conversations, bringing your constituents and community members into it with you, and saying we need technology that works for all of us.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Can I build off of that?
Yeah.
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, often I'm from Silicon Valley, right? Often we have this feeling like I know.
You're my new best friend.
I'm originally from Boston, okay. But you know, technology often feels like this wave that's crashing on you, right? And a lot of our mission at IFTF often is like we say help people like identify new possible futures and preferred futures and navigate, you know, how we want to adapt. Often that word often feels like, okay, we have to change, we have to respond, we can only respond to this thing crashing down upon us. And I think, I just want to put it out there that, just to build off what you're saying, Amy, is that, you know, especially with something that we're calling intelligence, I just want to remind everybody, I think you already know this, that like intelligence doesn't, like power doesn't come from intelligence, right? I mean, if just because you're intelligent doesn't mean you have power. Power comes from access, from influence, right? And advocacy. And it's easy to think of this just as this technology thing happening to us, but I remember I was seeing Akilia's presentation this morning talking about social change, right? This is our systemic change. This is an interesting moment where we're actually setting up new systems. And the folks who participate now in advocating for the kind of futures we want and the relationships we want with this technology are going to it's not going to be just changing the system, it's actually establishing. And it's a moment for everybody in this room to participate in that.
It sounds like a new role for IS to think about how it can help us coalesce around that particular theme of engaging in this moment. Toshi, let me stay with you for just a second. What are some of the more interesting applications that you've come across?
The 70s yearbook.
Yeah, I know. You get great photos of yourself. as you guys were saying earlier, I mean, one of the interesting things about generative AI is that it's a huge thing, right? It's this multifaceted, shape-shifting beast. It has many different kinds of applications. You might have played with ChatGPT, right? That's the ability just to have a conversation. Rapidly, just this month, these large language models are including what's called multimodal, meaning they don't just have conversations around text, they can understand images, they can understand sound, they can understand medical data, they can understand demographic data. And one of the ways I like to think about generative AI in its kind of superpower side, we often talk about superpowers and super problems. On the superpower side, like it's one of the most incredible magical translators there is, right? It's able not just to translate from human languages, from French to Chinese, it can translate from, human language to computer language. So in that category, the accessibility to technology is about to really open up. Before, only people who understand how to talk computer could program a computer. One of the things that generative AI and these large language models is opening up is the ability to just talk to your technology in your natural language. And these systems are starting to talk our language. And so, for example, the applications within education are huge. Like, I use this all the time when I'm trying to learn about a new subject, even generative AI. I say, like, I'll be chatting with it, and I'll say, like, explain that to me again as if I'm in, like, 5th grade, or give me a metaphor that will help me understand that. So the ability to kind of like translate into different learning styles, different modalities, different kind of neurodiversities, and it's going to be incredibly powerful in that realm. Another thing that is really incredible, what we like to say is, right now we're seeing kind of like the application of generative AI into a lot of these spaces that Amy talked about, like kind of these classification AI, information retrieval. So our kind of previous understanding of AI was more the Googles and the Bings, right? Like, how do we retrieve information? Generative AI actually generates new data and new information. And sometimes that information, as I said, is spot on. Sometimes it makes things up. So one of the things we like to say at Institute for the Future is, that it may not turn out to be the best information retrieval system or answer finder. You always need to check the work to make sure it's factually, ethically, all these reasons correct. But it's an unprecedented possibility explorer. And for humans, and this is for especially in the work that we do, which is all about helping individuals and organizations to break out of your current model and thinking about things and imagine new possibilities. I believe this is going to be unprecedented and allow us to even check our own mental models and expand those. I like to say, like, people talk about, superhuman intelligence. Like, I like to think, like, what if we are the superhuman intelligence we're waiting for? Meaning, how can we use these technologies to better understand the flaws in our own mental models as individuals, as systems, and build from there?
Amy, in our sector, like, trust is kind of a big deal. And not only in our sector, probably in the world, we're seeing declining levels of trust. Can AI help, hurt, neutral? What's your sense about that?
Yeah, I mean, not to like be the sad trombone, but I think it's yeah. I think there's a lot of potential to harm trust by what I was saying before, folks using without intention or knowledge or having set the guardrails that you can then, whether you choose as an organization to use certain AI tools and models or not, the trust is going to come from you being able to tell your community what your answer is and why, and then maintain that answer. And not say, don't worry, we don't use AI, we are not letting staff use any of your data, and then turn around and folks' data is showing up in ChatGPT because staff, copy-pasted it in and said, draft a donor thank you letter to this person, right? Now it's in the model, now you have broken your promise to your community, right? Again, not a different scenario or risk than other things and technologies and data privacy policies, et cetera, but a new, maybe really quick opportunity to break the policy. So I wanted to share an example, just as we're on this, that came up the other day. I was doing an AI training for a private network of human service organizations, and we had done the training, and then folks were calling in we had a separate QA time, so they could go take what they learned and then come back with questions. And the first person to unmute and say, oh, I have a question, was we're a clinical office, nonprofit, and we discovered that a clinical staff person, because paperwork takes so much time, was putting all of the client information from their sessions and asking ChatGPT to write up notes in the form of clinician notes.
This is where I break
and then
eye contact.
pasting it into their internal clinical notes database. And the only reason they discovered this was happening is because they noticed one specific clinical staff person's notes started getting real bad. And they were like, why are you making such garbage clinical notes in the file? Oh, because they came out of a random system. What's happening here? So their answer was, so we need a policy. And of course, my first answer is, you already have a policy.
You do.
You already have to follow HIPAA. You already have to follow. All of these things are already there, but because we're thinking of AI as a technology that's separate from anything else, staff are falling into this trap of thinking that we don't have any policies for AI because it's a separate technology. It's not. Technology is all interrelated, and as soon as you're using content or data from your organization, you have already made all those systems connected. So all of the policies are in place, especially in this case, where they're not even your organization's policy. HIPAA just exists. So I think when it comes to trust, it's remembering, okay, this is an emerging technology, let's build a beautiful future, and also we already have guidelines. We already have rules. We already have regulations that are giving us something to work with now and guide these conversations. Even if you do develop an AI use policy in your organization, know that it's going to build on top of policies that exist, and those policies, maintaining them, communicating them to your community. I mean, every staff person should be able to be at the fair with a clipboard and say, this is exactly how you can remove your data from our system, right? Every staff person needs to know how these policies work for your organization, AI or not, and that will really, I think, build a much better opportunity for trust, because people will know they can count on you, and they can come to you if they change their mind and they don't want their data with you or they don't want to be part of it.
So Jasmine, that's great. Jasmine, so you and I were talking last night about a tool that you use. I think it's like a personal assistant, right?
Copilot.
A Copilot, right. And,
Microsoft Copilot.
And for a while, the company didn't allow it to, and then suddenly you said, yeah, you better do it, and everybody did it.
Yeah.
Couple things
Typical
about,
adoption
right.
path.
So a couple things about that I want. First, I'd like you to just talk about whether we should think of some of these technologies, at least the exploration of them, not the adoption, but the exploration of them, in mission-based organizations as somewhat of an obligation. I mean, if these tools can potentially help us do our work more efficiently, better, serve more people, help change more lives, whatever our missions are we at least obligated to explore them? Just a question. And
Obligation's a tough word in that question.
It really is.
okay, go for it.
So
Correct my language.
I'm gonna finish where Amy ended and say, as a social worker, that is a crazy story. Like, it's just wrong. So I could feel,
Everyone was muted on Zoom, but you could feel the,
the gas. I could feel it in the story, the retelling. So as a nonprofit, in the work that I did with Airband, we often were providing internet access, and then we were working with nonprofits to provide adoption in communities. Your point around data, security, and privacy, absolutely. We were on a call once where a nonprofit was getting a ransom attack. We were on the call, Microsoft. And we had to like call our ransom team to see if we could help them. And apparently they declined the service. So we were like begging to see what we could do. I know. So as you think about this the fact that technology is evolving, think about the protection of your institution from a data security and just, data privacy and knowing what's in your data, like how the data is being derived. Absolutely. So I just want to end there, please, because I had that experience. It was just so weird for that to have happened in real time while I was on the call and my team was on the call. Obligation is a tough word. I will tell you, so for us, I work in Microsoft. Again, this is standard issue Microsoft wear. I worked in corporate for 10 years where our suits were the issue outfit. I appreciate New Balance jeans and a t-shirt. I really do. So I apologize that I think some of us, yes, this is the, yes. This is
spectrum, man.
This is a spectrum. I'm not in the West Coast, but this is New York, DC wear for Microsoft. Obligation's tough. So when we heard Microsoft was going to leave. Has anybody heard of Microsoft Copilot? So we heard they were going to release it. They told us, no, staff, you're not going to get it. Move on, stop crying. We complained and we went to the president, a lot of us. Apparently we didn't discuss it, but we each did it and they said, you have it on your phones. And that was like a month of complaining. It's amazing. I don't know how I lived without it. I love the fact that it drafts my presentations from my notes. From my OneNote, I can just slide it right in and it generates my slides and it puts in some images and I can just hit send to my boss. It tells me, hey, Art just sent you an email. Do you want to reply? He sent it 2 days ago. You still haven't responded to him. Here's what you might want to say. Do you agree? Do you want to edit it? I could edit it. My boss said, hey, did you use Copilot? I was like, yeah, I did. She's like, yeah, I did too. So everyone's really excited about Copilot right now. And to your point, Toshi, like no one is just like hitting the send button or the easy button. Everybody's we're editing it. It's learning from our behavior, right? In so many ways. We are so excited about the fact that we launched through our philanthropies team, AI for Skills. I'm sure you guys saw it on LinkedIn. They're our close friends as well at Microsoft. All the training is there. And so nonprofits are reaching out to say, how should we be leaning into AI? So I would say, I would have a meaningful conversation with your boards about, what's our governance model, what's our approach to AI, and how do we want to lean in? Have that conversation about the data protection strategy, the confidentiality strategy, how can staff be using it and not using it? What are you comfortable with, what are you not? What are the objectives you have for it? How are you thinking about using it? Obligation is a tough word. However, I would definitely explore conversations with nonprofits and with companies who are using AI to say, what can we do with it? And just play with what's out there without commitments, right?
Without pasting in.
Yes, don't paste anything. Don't paste anything. Just play with it. In fact, to that point, we are not to use ChatGPT on our corporate devices. Like that is not happening. So we don't put any corporate information out there. That's not how it works. But I do have a subscription that I personally pay for because I just think it's cool. And I'm just a fan now of the technology and I'm learning everything I can about it. Again, social worker by trade. I do not code. My husband codes. I do not code. But to Toshi's point, that's not what's going to be required. Everyone has a chance to learn about it. And I think the obligation, to be frank, if I can flip your question, sure. The obligation is to learn what's behind this technology as much as you can, the usefulness of it, how it can, address some of your concerns, address challenges your organization or your services have been trying to address. That's the obligation, to learn more about it. The advocacy opportunity is there. The worst thing nonprofits, I think, and again, check my bio, I've done it. I've done this for 20 years. The worst thing we can do is be in a room and not know and just be mad about something. I've experienced that. Just be mad. Akila, I know.
Okay, so
that's an opportunity for, I think, expertise, building that expertise as, learning on the street.
Right, so
Can I say a quick comment?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Just to say, where I would place the obligation, because one of the unique things about generative AI is you don't actually have to really choose to adopt it. It's coming to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's going to be in your social media. It's going to be in your work productivity. It's in your kids' education software. what I believe your obligation is not to adopt, your obligation is to build your literacy.
Learn, right.
Learn.
For your humanity.
All right, so here we're going to get into, we got a few more minutes left. And I have to end this session by breaking a traditional habit that many nonprofits have, which is to focus on the immediate. You know, we're just trying to get our budgets done for this year. We're trying to get through the end of the year. Maybe we'll have a little reserves, but, you know, we can't focus on 5, 7, 10 years. But we're going to do that today. The next few minutes, I'd like you all to be transforming yourselves to, 2033? And looking back saying, what do we need to be doing now to be ready for that? Toshi, why don't you start?
Well, this is our wheelhouse. This is what we do at IFTF. We typically look 10 years into the future. But one of the ways we do that is we use a technique called looking back to look forward. And that's not to say that you should look back and to try to figure out what's going to happen, but more importantly, to look back and see what caught you off guard in the last 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what we've been doing is like running thought exercises around like looking at other technological disruption points in human history and like how we've responded and what's come of it. And there's a lot of folks who maybe are more kind of bullish on AI who would say like, this is like the creation of the electrical grid, right? We're about to like literally illuminate society, and you're going to build capacities and industries and jobs like you could never imagine. We can't imagine what they're going to have. And it's going to create incredible abundance and move humanity forward in that way. There's others who I think would say perhaps we would draw better from looking at more of like our history with plastics. Right? Plastics came about and created this incredible amount of basically the ability to easily manufacture things that were very expensive before. And now there was a perception of incredible abundance, right? And it did, in many ways, create incredible abundance across the world. And you could say
abundance of plastic.
An
abundance of plastic.
Right.
Exactly. That's my point.
Right.
Is that, today you could argue we're kind of building cognitive manufacturing, making cognitive abilities more widely distributed, and we're able that results in the idea of maybe every individual student can have their own personalized tutor, right? Or we're going to make scientific and medical discoveries like they did with AlphaFold with these technologies, and the ability to kind of use these new cognitive abilities. But as you guys pointed out, it took us decades to realize just how toxic that was, and now we're literally, our entire ecosystem and our bodies even, are filled with microplastics, right? So that took us decades to really realize and that's why I think it's important to look, superpower, super problems, right? And try to do that forecasting. My favorite analogy I like to bring up, and I feel like we should be maybe focusing a little bit more on, is maybe a little less sexy, but public libraries. I think we should be looking at this as public infrastructure. Even though there's private companies doing this work, there's no secret sauce here. We all know the recipes. There's no reason why this couldn't be public infrastructure like the internet initially was. I mean, if you look at the library system in the United States, initially it was made by language engineers, books, and it even was sponsored by the tech bros of their time. It just happened to be steel and railroad technology. But that's the kind of model I would like to see us take in the next 10 years, and it's completely possible. I heard Sam Altman speak in a podcast, he was kind of getting grilled, why, you guys were supposed to be open AI. How come this isn't open anymore? And he's like, well, we needed $10 billion from Microsoft to run this stuff, right? Well, we did. They needed the money to actually develop the technology. And the interviewer said, well, couldn't you have done it any else way? Well, if this was 50 years ago, we would have done this as a public project, and we still can.
Great. Amy?
Yeah, I think two things if I'm thinking about 10 years from now, looking back and what I hope we did at this moment, or hope we do or call us to do now. One is acknowledge the digital oil spill that's created by us using this amount of computational power, that we are deeply and intentionally invested in ensuring our little rock in space doesn't just burn up. are, even though you don't see that server farm or room, you don't see the heat coming off of it, you don't see the electricity powering it, doesn't mean that every time you are using technology tools, you are creating that. There are initiatives out there working to help organizations measure so that they can be accountable to their impact in this way, but especially well-resourced organizations in this room that are foundations and have the means in a material way, please be part of that. Make sure that you are supporting accounting for that digital use for your grantees, who you are not giving enough money to, period, but you're definitely not giving enough money to support their own accountability for that and using tools you're expecting them to use. And then the other side of that, just to stay on that tone, is I really hope that we are not 10 years from now still saying like, oh, Microsoft, oh, Google, that we have built tools that work for us, that benefit us, that we are able to directly and materially influence and maintain. That takes a ton of financial resourcing, and it takes a lot of human attention time that will require stipends and food and childcare for our community members to be really intentionally involved in us building those tools. It will take the long-term maintenance funding for nonprofits themselves to be the owners and maintainers of those tools. All of those pieces need to be resourced and can be by people in this room and people in this room that we all know. But I hope that 10 years from now, we are not seeing only opportunities from established commercial technology service providers, but we are also really seeing that there are options and technology platforms that we helped create and that we are part of that are all part of a bigger kind of milieu of opportunities for us.
So I'm going to pull in a bit of what Toshi said. When I was working on digital divide work, public libraries were absolutely in every community. Yeah. And so when we thought about infrastructure, that was absolutely a potential, like, amazing way to think about how to address, how people saw the digital divide widening. Like, why aren't we leveraging public libraries, spaces that are available to all of us? So I absolutely love that analysis, and absolutely about the sustainability of the compute power it takes. It are huge things to address. I'm going to go back to the people. I'm going to lean in where Amy left off and add another element. Nonprofits are core anchor institutions, so are our universities. Mm-hmm. Our universities are often underfunded, particularly those that are public land-grant universities. Many of them are Hispanic and historically Black colleges and universities have been underfunded for years, decades, and built on promises. So my job, I enjoy it. I spend time with the MSIs, or minority serving institutions. I shouldn't say minority, let me just say Hispanic serving and historically Black colleges and universities. I did not attend one, you will see that. But I will say that I would love to see more collaborations, meaning that to the points that we made, you all are the solution to what's happening. Your staff, your board members, your community participants already know what we should be doing. Mm-hmm. So what's wonderful is I don't have to come in with an answer as Microsoft. I just have to help support and enable what already is happening. Mm-hmm. My job is empowerment. My job is to support, cut a check, and support. My job is to bring in technology, bring in engineers, figure out cloud solutions, Azure credits, support, to help be co-developers of what your dream is. And so 10 years from now, 2033, I would love to see that we have figured out that students need actually more money to go to school. We're still, thanks to Microsoft, I'm actually able to afford student loans, right? I'm able to help close the racial wealth gap of 400 years. So wouldn't it be wonderful if, as a nation, we could help pay students who are first generation their ability to get a STEM education and really innovate on the ideas that are built in underserved public land grant and historically Black colleges and universities and HSIs. Wouldn't that be genius if we actually paid for that? This technology is moving fast, and the solutions are there. The solutions are there, and it's often underfunded. The students who are working in their dorms and they're not capitalized, it's often underfunded. So how do we do that? We fund it now. 10 years from now, we funded it. Students aren't going into debt doing this work, and we are innovating their businesses. They're able to grow, and to your point, it's not just a few big tech giants, but we have built an ecosystem of talent, not just in private sector, but also in public sector and the nonprofit sector. And now we have so much more to talk about than just AI. We're talking about all the other things that it has produced. There is gonna, to Toshi's point, our job is to think about what are those challenges that could come. I think the more we can be honest about that, the more you all are actively engaged and learning as learners, as taking up that constant learning, and at Microsoft we call it the growth mindset, being lifelong learners. That's how we get better at it. Your engagement and participation, but also making sure that we're invested in what is next.
Great.
And so that's what's exciting.
Well, let me do this. Let's thank our panelists. That was terrific, amazing.
Thank you.
Let's put up on the screen too, there's some resources that you can all click on get a QR code up there where you can all access these resources that independent sector has made available to all those who want to know more about this. So thank you very much for your attention, and we're going to get you to move on to your next sessions.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.